Hello friends, welcome back to another video. It is World MS Day. So today, May 30th, is World MS Day. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. I was diagnosed with MS in August 2021. So today I wanted to make a video on some facts about MS. Also, if you're not new here, I got my hair cut. It's a real short bob. And I've got a real short fringe and all. Oof, looks unreal. But my fringe was like kind of not giving today. It was like parting and I'm like, can't be doing that. So I just put a little hairband on it. Anyways, I'm going to try and make this video kind of short because I don't want it to be a lengthy one, even though there are a lot of facts about MS, but we'll try and make it a quick one. So let's get into it. Also, I don't know why I've been sitting like this. I don't know. I'm not filming that intro again though. There's Nala. Hi. Hi, chicken. Okay, fact number 1. MS is 3 times more common in women than it is men. That's a little bit unfair. So therefore, women get diagnosed with MS 3 times more than men do. Fact number 2. MS is an autoimmune disease. What this means is your immune system mistakes a certain part of your body as a pathogen. So it thinks a certain part of your body is a foreign particle and it needs to get rid of it. In MS, your immune cells mistake your central nervous system as the pathogen. So your central nervous system consists of your brain and your spinal cord, and it's protected by a fatty kind of sheet or fatty barrier called the myelin sheath. So when your immune system, it initiates this immune response and it thinks, well, we need to get rid of, let's say, a certain part on the brain or a certain part in your spine. So it attacks the myelin sheath first. The blood-brain barrier is an extremely efficient barrier that protects your brain because there's a lot of things that shouldn't be going into your central nervous system. And for the most part, the blood-brain barrier is extremely efficient. So in this case, your immune cells they're able to get by the blood-brain barrier and into your central nervous system. And then once in there, they begin to attack your neurons. So essentially the signal from one neuron to another, it's delayed because it now has a little break in it, let's say. So these immune cell attacks, they show up on an MRI and they come up as a white color. They're known as lesions. So when someone with MS says they have lesions on the brain, that's what they are. They're the damage done by your immune cells in a particular area, and they just happen to show up on an MRI as like a white bright light. Another point to mention, it's not really a fact, but it's just a little educational point. People use words like attacks, relapse, exacerbation, episodes. They're all used interchangeably, but they mean the same thing. They're when your immune system is attacking your central nervous system. Just as a piece of information, as an FYI. Number 3, MS is a disability. Over time, in particularly if it's left untreated, it leads to physical disability. Now, in saying that, there are some people that will have MS and they may only have 1, maybe 2 attacks in their lifetime. They might have a very low lesion count. Some people might never have multiple relapses, and sometimes they will never actually develop into that physical disability. But for a lot of people, if it was left untreated, it would develop into that physical disability because it's these multiple attacks continuously breaking down parts of the central nervous system. Number 4. There are 4 different types of MS. Some people say there's 3 types. The 3 main types I'll talk about, and then I'll touch on the 4th one. So the 3 main ones are relapse remitting MS, secondary progressive MS, and primary progressive MS. Each one of these is a progressed version of the previous. Now, the 4th one that I'm going to mention is called clinically isolated syndrome. Not everybody who has MS will get diagnosed with that. It's technically the first stage of MS, but not everybody gets diagnosed with that. I was actually diagnosed with this initially. What it means is you have 1 lesion on your brain and you've got 1 clinical episode. So the first time I ever experienced any MS symptoms, when I went into hospital and we did the MRIs, I had 1 lesion and it correlated with the symptoms that I was having. And if you get diagnosed with that, you've 80% chance of being diagnosed with MS. But not everybody gets diagnosed with that. A lot of the time, the first time they get MS symptoms, when they do their MRIs, they might have multiple lesions. So it's not clinically isolated anymore. So that's why a lot of people don't actually get diagnosed with clinically isolated syndrome. Anyways, enough about that. Number 5. The most common type of MS is relapse remitting MS, and I think it's something like 80%. Correct me if I'm wrong, any fellow MSers in the audience. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's 80% of people with MS have relapse remitting MS. It's either 80 or 85. Something like that. Number 6. I can't do 6. Oh, I can. Number six. The average age to get diagnosed with MS is between 28 and 40. No, that's a lie. The average age to get diagnosed with MS is between 20 and 40 years of age. I was diagnosed when I was 28 years old, so I'm kind of pretty much in the middle. Another 2 years I would have been smack bang in the middle. Smack bang. Number 7. MS is way more common in countries located in the northern hemisphere. So countries that are furthest away from the equator have higher rates of MS. And this is said to be a correlation with the lack of vitamin D. We get vitamin D from the sun. So countries in the northern hemisphere or countries furthest away from the equator, we really don't get that much sun. So therefore we have way less vitamin D compared to countries that are very, very close to the equator. And therefore we have this higher rate of MS diagnosis or MS patients. So there you go. That's why most people who have MS will also take a vitamin D supplement, like myself. Number 8. I can't do that properly. There are 10,000 people in Ireland living with MS, and I'm one of them. Number 9. MS is not a genetically inherited disease. So there's not a singular gene that's responsible for people getting MS. It's not like you have a faulty gene. It's not like you have a recessive gene that has caused a genetic disorder. So we don't actually pass it on genetically from parents to offspring. In saying that, if your parents have MS, you have a slightly higher chance of developing MS. Now, I think it's something like a 3% higher chance of developing MS than someone who comes from a family who doesn't have MS. So it's not like drastically high percentage, like, well, if your parent has it, you have a 50% chance of having it. It's not like that. You just have a slightly higher chance, but it's not like a singular gene that's responsible for MS. Number 10, I think we're on 10. There's currently no cure for MS, but there are various treatments out there. So you've got tablets, you've got self-injectables, you've got infusions, and there's also a thing called stem cell transplant, which is an extremely invasive procedure / treatment, but it is an extremely innovative way of treating MS. There's a lot of research in MS. It's a very, very hot topic, if you will. And you know, we've come a long way from 40 years ago. Like a long way. So, you know, it's only going to get better. We'll have to see it. Number 11. MS is defined as a chronic illness, and it's also defined as an invisible illness. By invisible illness, we mean that sometimes looking at someone who has MS, you wouldn't actually know that person has a disease, that this person has a chronic illness. Because for the most part, when people go into remission, they kind of just look like everybody else. Now, that's not the case with everyone. Like, some people might need some sort of walking support if they use like a walking stick or a wheelchair or any form of a walking support. Or some people might have a limp. You know, there's various different physical disabilities that can come with MS and that people with MS do suffer with. But a lot of the time, you don't actually necessarily know by looking at somebody that they have MS. And it can be really challenging for the person with MS because they kind of get treated the same way as someone who doesn't have MS. And yes, we're all here for equality. But let's say, for example, I get weak legs sometimes. And if I am at a bus stop and I really need to sit down, nobody knows looking at me, oh, that person has MS. I might offer her to sit down and I might stand up. Or if I'm on a bus and I'm standing, nobody knows by looking at me that, oh, geez, that girl has weak legs. You know, just because I look like everybody else. So in that sense, it's quite challenging. Number 12? I think 12. MS is unique to each individual. There are no two MS patients that are identical, and this is because of symptom variations. Everyone's journey is different, everyone's symptoms are different, people's diagnoses are different. It's just an extremely variable disease. So you can think of it like a fingerprint. No one has the same fingerprint as you. Same as somebody who has MS, or same as two people with MS. It's not going to be the exact same. You will definitely share similar symptoms with people, but your exact journey, it won't match somebody else's. Number 14? No, 13? I think it's 13. Why is this hard to remember? MS can be really difficult to diagnose. It involves MRIs of your brain and your spine. It involves multiple blood tests. It involves assessments. So your neurologist will do different assessments on your different nerve pathways. There we go. And a spinal tap. So your spinal tap is also known as a lumbar puncture, and it is where a massive needle is injected into your spine to retain some cerebrospinal fluid. And essentially what they're looking for is oligoclonal bands. So a person without MS will either have no oligoclonal bands or they'll have one. And then a lot of the time people with MS will have multiple of these bands. So they'll have oligoclonal bands. And that's just another way that helps them make an MS diagnosis, because when you have that multiple bands, that's actually your immune cells in your central nervous system. And remember the blood-brain barrier, if that's fully functioning, it won't let them in. But in MS, it gets a bit leaky and it lets those immune cells in, and that's when it'll show up as those multiple bands. So it just helps with a diagnosis. But in saying that, it's a very difficult disease to diagnose. It's not straightforward. A lot of the time it's process of elimination. That's why also they do so many blood tests. I remember when I was in hospital, I did I think something between 16 and 20 blood tests in a row. They were just retaining so many blood samples. They were like, do you feel dizzy? I was like, well, I already do. I mean, the room is spinning. I'm seeing 2 of everything. I mean, losing a bit of blood, it's not going to make much of a difference to this hell that I'm in. So yeah, it's a very difficult disease to diagnose. It can be process of elimination, and there's a lot of tests / kind of assessments that need to go on. Okay, last but not least, I think this is 14. Correct me if I'm wrong. So a lot of the time with MS, we focus on the physical disability side of things, and the treatments for MS also focus on this. However, there is a lot of cognitive impairment that happens in MS patients, and there's not a huge amount of focus on it. Now, obviously, preventing physical disability is incredible, but cognitive impairment, it's extremely challenging. So let me give you some examples. Memory. A lot of people with MS suffer with their memory, like short-term memory, forgetting about appointments, forgetting people's names, forgetting to complete certain tasks, inability to concentrate. Concentrating on things can be really, really difficult. Problem solving can be massively impaired with MS, and even things like trying to think of words. You know what you want to say, but you actually cannot get the words. Like, you forget certain words, and it could be mobile phone, something you use every single day, but you will not be able to get that word. If that's something that you suffer with MS. And it's things like missing appointments, double booking, forgetting conversations that you've had with people, talking to people, and you zone out and then you zone back in. You're like, I have no idea what we're talking about. Or even worse, you're talking and then you forget literally mid-sentence what you're talking about, or you've asked a question and now someone's explaining it to you and you're like, what did I ask? I don't know what question I've asked you. And it can be very embarrassing, especially in a work setting where people don't really know MS. They don't fully understand it. They might not know other people with MS, and they don't know the cognitive impairment side of it. I think a lot of the time with MS, people think wheelchair. I was one of those. You think MS means you're going to be in a wheelchair, because that is the way it was for a long, long, long time. But there is a whole rake of symptoms outside of physical symptoms that come with MS. Anyways, they're all the points. They're all the facts. I said that I was going to make this a short video. I'm recording for 27 minutes. So I'm really hoping that when I'm editing this, I can really narrow it down. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have learned something, especially if you don't know much about MS, you don't know people with MS. I really hope that this has been educational. I kind of want to use this day to just spread awareness about the disease and share some facts with you all. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I very, very much appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, and I shall see you all in the next video. Bye.